Muy buenas tardes a todos, bienvenidas y bienvenidos en Casa SEAT. I switch in English, as today we will have the pleasure to listen to one of the most inspiring speakers in the world, Shapiro. I'm sure you know all about him, and it's really a privilege to have Stephen with us, and most of all to have also here physically Phillipe Delespesse, who is also a very good speaker, also very much into the world of innovation. And Phillipe has been a manager in very prominent companies like Unilever and Henkel, and then he created his own business, Inteligencia Creativa, in Barcelona. Y desde hace, since a few years, he's living in Barcelona. As usual, for me it's a pleasure to welcome you here, and then I will give you también, if you want, the option, we'll offer you the option, also to visit CASA SEAT. It's very important to respect also the measures. Therefore, as you have seen, we have reduced the space, the availability of the space, and I also invite you, when the event will be finished, to exit respecting the distance. And if you are interested, we can also have a tour, a guided tour in CASA SEAT, if some of you will know more, would like to know more about us. Without more, I will leave you to Phillipe and to Stephen, who will be connected online from the United States. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gabriele. Still surprising to see an audience with the mask and everything, and the light is like science fiction. So good evening, everybody. Welcome to CASA SEAT. My name is Phillipe. I'm Belgian. As Gabriele said, I'm living here since now 26 years already in Barcelona. And so thanks to CASA SEAT and to SEAT to invite me to facilitate this event tonight. And it's a pleasure. And you know, SEAT is probably one of the most innovative and also fast-growing company in the car industry in this moment. And you have seen, or you will have the opportunity to visit this wonderful place, CASA SEAT here. That probably will be one of the highlights of Barcelona in some years. No? CASA SEAT is a global hub of mobility. So you can imagine what is the challenge in a global hub of mobility. No? It's how to reinvent mobility in the cities. So I let you 10 seconds to think about this challenge. No? Reinvent the mobility in a city. Just 10 seconds. I think we don't even need 10 seconds, and you already have in your mind something like how to have less cars in the city, how to reduce mobility in the city. And of course that can be part of the challenge, but is it really the whole challenge? Or do we need maybe to reframe it and go further? Because maybe we will miss some good questions, like how to optimize mobility without reducing it, why not? Or to being more disruptive, why not? How to have the services moving around instead of the people, which is another good question. So if we go only to the first original challenge, probably we will miss a lot of good solutions, no? The invisible solutions that you can see there on the book that we can miss. And I would add something from my experience also. It's not only the risk to lose or not to find and to lose these invisible solutions. It's probably also sometimes to solve the wrong problem. Or even worse, to find a lot of solutions without problem. No? We see a lot, no? Very good ideas, and where is the problem to make the idea relevant? No? That's why reframing is so important, and to think about the problem is so important, because in many companies, they think they have their problems crystal clear. I mean, we don't need time to think about the problem. It's crystal clear. Let's jump to the solutions. That's what we need, no? And then they put the same people in the same meeting room with the same questions, looking from the same way at the problem, and they are surprised not to find new solutions. No, so that's why really they need this first step in the innovation process, which is reframing the problems. So, and I would say it's even more important now in these COVID times, because companies have a lot of new challenges. You can imagine challenges like how to sell to clients I cannot visit, how to motivate a team when I see my people this size on the screen, how to make work a production plant with a social distance. So people are really facing new challenges, a lot of new challenges. That's why it's more important than ever to be able to think about the problem. And even the old challenges, because we still have the old challenges also, how to improve sales, how to find new channels, whatever, are totally new because the whole environment has changed. So in this case, we also need a good reframe to think about the problem. So that's why it's so important. Talking about the COVID, something is coming to my mind, a challenge that I'm sure you all have on your table now. How to improve remote working. If you tackle the challenge this way, with remote working, I'm sure you are thinking from home. Why from home? I said remote. I did not say from home. So why to do it this way? So we should reframe, and maybe we will have some questions to optimize work, not only from home, but maybe from the bar next home. So we should really think about it before facing this problem. Sometimes even a slight change in the wording is a big change in the view of the problem. Give you an example that I lived in a project. For example, it's not the same to look for new insurance or to look for new ways to cover the risk. It seems a very slight change, but the result is totally different if you face your problem one way or the other way. That's why it's so important now, and it's the topic that we will, and the issue that we will be talking about today, but now I'm sure you're waiting for Stephen, and I will introduce, maybe we can see Stephen on the screen already, and we can connect with Orlando. Stephen, good afternoon for you, because I think the difference is 5 or 6 hours. What time is it there in Orlando now?
It is a little after 12:30, so we have a 6-hour time zone
6-hour difference, yeah. So I will introduce briefly Stephen. You can find the whole information on his website, which is stephenshapiro.com. But Stephen has worked during years for Accenture, well-known company, and before becoming a full-time speaker, innovation speaker, and he's also part of the Hall of Fame. My definition of the Hall of Fame of speakers will be like the Champions League of speakers, no? To make it understandable. So it's really on the top of the speakers in the US also. And he has published some books that I strongly recommend. One is, for example, 24/7 Innovation, Personality Poker. Best Practices Are Stupid. I like a lot the title of this one. Best Practices Are Stupid. And the last one is Invisible Solutions, and he will be talking about this book today. And after the book, we'll have the opportunity to ask some questions. So I think it's time to you, Stephen.
Well, thank you very much. What a fantastic introduction, because I think that you really got to the heart of the challenges that we've always faced, but we face now more than ever, which is making sure we're solving the right problems. And your examples were brilliant, and the way you framed it was spot on. I appreciate everyone coming out to CASA SEAT today or tonight, because I think I know it's challenging times everywhere in the world. And I know that in Barcelona, there are some increased restrictions that have just been introduced. So I appreciate the fact that you're taking time to be here, and I want to respect that time and provide as much value as I possibly can. And here's what I want you to do. I want everybody to, if you have a sheet of paper, great. If you don't, you can still play along with this sort of from a mental perspective. But what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to grab a sheet of paper, and here's the question I want you to think about. And I want you to just keep this in the back of your mind as we go through the presentation here. I want you to identify an issue, problem, challenge, or opportunity that you want to solve. Now, it could be something related to work. It could be something personal. It doesn't matter, because right now we're just sort of playing around with the thought process of reframing. All good problem statements start with how can we? So it might be, how can we work remotely, or how can we work virtually? Whatever words we are using, that might be the problem. So I want you just to take a moment to think about something that if you could solve it, would create a lot of value for you or your organization, because that's what I want to do today. We're going to share some stories about how changing the question changed the results. We will then give you some tools. And if you aren't able to write down the website to get the tools, I will send you, we'll make sure we get a link to you on that. But we're going to talk about an actual tool that you can use to reframe problems. And then I'll take the problem of mobility and put it through these lenses to demonstrate how it works. We'll do some question and answer and end with a story. So with that, I'd like to move forward, and I'd like you to we're going to do a quick experiment here. This is just a mental experiment. What I'd like you to do if you have a sheet of paper, great, write it down. If not, just remember it, is I'd like you to, I'm going to give you 3 commands. I'd like you to write down the first thing that comes to your mind for each of these commands. The first thing. So the first thing that comes to your mind when I tell you to write down a color. First color, write it down or just think it, lock it into your memory. The second thing I want you to write down is a piece of furniture. Again, whatever comes to your mind, don't filter it, write it down or keep it in your memory. And the last one is the name of a genius. Okay, so I'm going to try to do a little mind reading here and see how I did. You'll know if I was able to read your mind and see what you wrote down. So for the color, most people are going to write down either red, blue, or green, or maybe yellow. That tends to be about 70% of the people. Because I use a lot of purple, I've got purple, my colors are purple. Maybe you wrote down purple or pink. If you're an analytical person, maybe you wrote down black or white. And then we get some of the outliers who wrote down orange or brown. So my guess is I probably got most of the colors that you wrote down at this point. For the piece of furniture, well, given the fact that we're spending a lot of time right now at our computers, sitting on a chair in front of a desk, I think a lot of you probably wrote down chair or desk, but maybe you wrote down sofa, couch, or table. And if you're a little sleepy and you're ready to go to sleep sometime soon, you might have written down the word bed. So these are, I think, pretty common things that people write down. And then for the name of a genius, most of you probably wrote down Einstein. I also suspect there's a few of you there who wrote down your own name or the word me. Now, the reason why I use this quick experiment with you is to demonstrate something that is true for all human beings. We are very predictable. And our past often will limit our ability to see better futures. Our past limits our ability to see different and potentially better futures. And so what happens is the brain's primary function is not innovation. We'd love to think that we're all innovators, and we are at some level, but its primary function is survival. The primary function of the brain is survival. And so what the brain does is it assumes everything that we did prior to showing up today kept us safe. Therefore, it is safe to continue to do that. And so what the brain does is it creates something called neural pathways. And basically all neural pathways are paths or grooves in the brain to things that we think about a lot, or things we thought about for a long time, or in some cases, things that we thought about recently. So let's dig a little deeper into this just to demonstrate why this is true. You know, when we look at the colors, red, blue, green, and yellow, these are the primary colors of light and paint. These are also the first colors we tend to learn as children. So this is a picture I recently took from a store, and you'll notice that on the one side you had green, blue, and red as the colors that are included. And on the other one, they added yellow. These are children's chalk. So we've learned these colors the longest. We have the deepest neural pathways to them, and we will think about them the longest. My guess is that many of you had Einstein sitting in either a red or blue chair. So what we've demonstrated here is the fact that we're predictable as human beings. Our past becomes our future in many cases, which is a dangerous thing. And I'll also just have you consider the possibility that because of that, our expertise, although it's valuable, our expertise can be the enemy of innovation. The more you've thought about a topic, the harder it is for you to think differently about that topic. Let me show you the power of changing the question. So I love this example because even during a lockdown, we're still all hopefully brushing our teeth, even though we aren't seeing people. It's still a very good thing to do. And if you go to the supermarket or pharmacy or chemist and you look at the toothpaste there, one of the things you're going to notice is pretty much all toothpaste claims to whiten teeth. And the way they do that is with a mild abrasive or mild bleach. So there's a team of dental experts in the UK that decided they wanted to solve the problem. How can we, the experts, create a toothpaste that whitens teeth but doesn't use abrasives or bleach? Now, there's a couple things about this problem statement. One is it assumes that the experts, the people who are dental care experts, will have the solution. And it also assumes that the problem is specific to teeth. And so in working on this problem, they tried a number of different chemical compounds. Nothing worked until somebody asked a profound question. This is a question I want you to consider. It's 2 words. It's 2 words. The question is, who else? Who else has solved a similar problem, not the same exact problem, but a similar problem in a different area of expertise? So if you were to think about that and ask the question, who else makes whites whiter without using bleach? The answer may be obvious. The answer is laundry detergent. As it turns out, the company that was working on this problem, Unilever, in addition to having a dental care division, they have a laundry care division. And they thought it'd be really great to talk to the people in laundry care and find out, how do you make whites whiter when you're not using bleach? And they asked them that question. And they were told something fascinating. They said, we don't make whites whiter, we make whites bluer. We make whites bluer. The blue dye in laundry detergent creates an optical illusion, an optical effect that prevents the reflection of yellow. Your clothes are still dingy yellow, you just can't see it. And they thought this would be a great idea to create a toothpaste that uses the same technique. And it is a toothpaste that has in it a blue dye. And this blue dye creates the illusion of whiteness instantly. And it's a brilliant idea, finding a solution from someone else. A lot of times when we're looking for our solutions, we look to people in our industry or our area of expertise or our function, when in fact, sometimes the best solutions come from somewhere else. And here's what I want you to consider, and this is where we're going to spend the rest of our time, is that the questions we ask have a profound impact on the solutions that are visible. There are solutions to every problem out there, great problems, but they're invisible because we haven't taken the time to reframe the problem. Coming back to something that Phillipe talked about before, is we're all now in the situation of working virtually. So for many, the first question that they asked was, how can I replicate? And I think that's the important thing here, is they were using the word replicate. How can I replicate the in-person meeting virtually? And that gives us one set of solutions. But maybe we look to engagement, which is a different question. Now it's not replication, it's engagement. How do we keep people involved and engaged when they're working virtually, when they're working remotely? As Phillipe said, maybe it's not at home, but maybe it's another place that's not the office, but they're still working remotely. But we need to keep them engaged. Different question. Or another really powerful question to consider is, how do we leverage the fact that digital is a great asynchronous tool? So we're all here together right now live. I'm in Orlando, Florida. You're in Barcelona. But we're all here real time. But the great thing that we can do, and I'm going to show you something I'm going to share with you afterwards, is we can deliver content asynchronously, whether it's video or other types of tools. We have so much at our fingertips right now that we really didn't have in the past to not only engage people, but meet people when they need to work. If you have children at home, I'm sure it is difficult for you to work during regular working hours. This is one of the challenges my clients are facing. So how can you support those clients? Well, maybe it's asynchronous content. Instead of meeting real time, you allow them to do their work asynchronously later at night when the kids are asleep. Also, another great question to ask is, how do we eliminate unnecessary meetings or unnecessary aspects of meetings? In the past, we've had meetings for the sake of meetings, but maybe we can start thinking, if we use the combination of what aspects of meetings do we eliminate, which meetings do we eliminate, and the asynchronous. And now we could do, if we're doing a status report, for example, well, why do we have someone deliver a 5-minute status report with everybody watching on Zoom when that could be sent as a video before the call? And the next report could be a video, and the next report could be a video. And then when we get everybody together, we've eliminated the unnecessary aspect of people just talking, and now we can have a conversation real time, true engagement. And then the last one is, look, we're going to be in this situation for a while, most likely, but at some point we will be meeting regularly in person. But there's some aspects of virtual that I think we all want to consider for the future. So we've experienced this whole shifting of the question, whether it's conscious or not, throughout this whole process right now over the past handful of months. And we will continue to evolve our thinking as things go forward. So let's talk about how changing the question can change the solution. And here's a very simple example. This is one from NASA. So NASA, they're getting back to manned spacecraft. Back in the day before, when they had the space shuttles and people were going up into space, one of their biggest challenges was, how do we take a washing machine like this that we use here on Earth and bring it up into space? The problem is the washing machines, as they are designed here on Earth, require gravity. So the challenge that they tried to initially solve was, how can we use a washing machine in zero gravity? They called it the zero gravity laundry system challenge. And they tried this and it failed because they realized it was complicated. It involved pumps and pipes and valves, and it was just way too complex. They realized that it could have been a different question. And the question was a very simple one. How can we get clothes clean? Well, now we're not talking about pumps, valves, pipes, and all of that. We're now talking about a very simple solution, a cleaning solution, a fluid that can actually take the clothes and make them clean. But here's the fascinating thing with this example. We can change one word in the problem statement, and get a completely different range of solutions. And this is what I want you to consider, is we need to choose our words carefully, because a lot of times we use words interchangeably that aren't. So instead of asking the question, how can we get clothes clean? They ask the question, how can we keep clothes clean? How can we keep clothes clean? That's a different question. Now we're not talking about cleaning fluids and getting the clothes clean after the fact. We're now talking about preventing them from getting dirty in the first place using antimicrobials and other material science problems. So this is a very simple example of how changing just one word in a problem statement can unleash a completely different range of solutions. But we tend not to take enough time to think about it. Here's an example from the UK. The problem that was originally being solved is, how can we improve the education system? How can we improve the education system? Now, I want you to think about that for a moment, the education system. Now, this is a complex problem for a variety of reasons, and there's a reasons why it hasn't been solved. And it's complex because there's so many different factors. There's teachers pay, classroom size, infrastructure, technology. Now we have to deal with virtual classrooms. There's so many different factors that influence the education system. So in working on this problem, one of the things that was done was to first ask an important question, which is, well, the education system is a means to an end. Having a great education system isn't the goal. It provides us with something else. So what is the ultimate goal of the education system? And that is a child's learning. So when the problem statement went from how can we improve an education system to how can we improve a children's ability to learn, now it opened up a different range of solutions and different places to look. And in fact, in talking with experts, it was determined that there is one factor more than anything else that has been scientifically proven to have the greatest impact on a child's learning. And that is parental involvement, positive parental involvement. It's not just being actively involved, but it's actually being actively involved in the education process itself. It is actually being there with the child, learning with them, and experiencing the process. When the question was shifted from education system, which could have invited thousands and thousands of irrelevant ideas, to positive parental involvement, a solution was found in Bogota, Colombia, where there's an experimental school that has 100% positive parental involvement. And that solution was purchased by the UK to be able to be adapted and adopted in their situation. So changing the question changes the range of solutions. Now, I would love to have been with you today in Barcelona. It is one of my favorite cities in the world. But unfortunately, a lot of us can't fly right now for a whole variety of reasons. Well, let's just talk about when we could fly. Because one of the things when we were flying is that it was a great experience, except we'd have to jam our luggage into the carry-on, which was always a bit of a pain. And so, one of the things we typically have to do is we'd have to check our bags. Now, when we check our bags, we get to the baggage claim and we wait. And so, let's face it, you get off of a long flight, you're tired, you don't want to have to wait for your bags. So one of the airports here in the US, they asked the passengers what their biggest complaint was. They found it was baggage claim. And so they decided to do some analysis, and they found that it took on average 15 to 20 minutes for the bags to get from the plane to the baggage carousel. So they decided to solve the problem. How can we speed up the bags? How can we speed up the bags? And they spent a ton of money on faster conveyor belts, more baggage handlers, newer technology. They got it from 15 to 20 minutes down to 8 to 10 minutes. 15 to 20 minutes down to 8 to 10 minutes. Think about that for a moment. That is a 50% improvement. They 2x'd the speed. Now, if you were working on a problem like this and you were able to improve it that much, you would probably declare success. And then they asked the passengers, what now is your biggest complaint? What do you think they heard? Baggage claim still took too long. You all know that there's a point of diminishing returns in any investment. They knew that if it took them that much time, money, or energy to get it to 8 minutes, to get it to 7 minutes, 6 minutes, or 5 minutes would be prohibitively expensive. And then they had an epiphany. They realized the bags took 8 to 10 minutes to get from the plane to the baggage carousel. But at this particular airport, it only took the passengers 1 to 3 minutes to get from the plane to the baggage carousel. So what do you think they did? Instead of speeding up the bags, they slowed down the passengers. They literally reconfigured the airport so that it would take, on average, 8 to 10 minutes for the passengers to get from the plane to the baggage carousel. They get to the baggage carousel, their bags are waiting, they are happy, boom. So what was going on here? What was going on here? Well, what they were doing was they were originally solving the problem, how can we speed up the bags, when in fact, maybe the real problem was, how can we reduce wait time? Now, I want you to think about this for a moment. Speed of bags, wait time, they're similar, they're not the same. Because the wait time is made up of the speed of the bags and the speed of the passengers. And here's the point that I want you to consider. If you spend all of your time trying to speed up bags, you will never think to slow down passengers. The questions we ask have a profound impact on the range of solutions we develop, and we don't take enough time to think about the questions. Because we could take this one question, how can we reduce wait time, and change one word, and get a completely different range of solutions. Instead of asking, how can we reduce wait time, we could ask the question, how can we improve wait time? Now we're not talking about the speed, we're talking about the experience. How can I improve the wait experience? Well, you're not going to talk to airports to get this answer because they don't have the best wait experience, although there are a couple that are starting to do some great work. But where do you go if you want to talk about waiting in line? Well, I'm coming to you from Orlando, Florida. We are the experts here in waiting. I have Universal Studios about 2 miles in one direction. I have Disney World a few miles in the other direction. These are the experts in waiting, and they spend a lot of money trying to eliminate the wait time or reduce the wait time. But when they can't do that, they focus on creating a great wait experience. And a buddy of mine here in Orlando was developing a ride here called the Race Through New York with Jimmy Fallon. And they wanted to create this incredible wait experience, something that was unparalleled in the theme park industry. And so what happens is you go here, and when you walk in, instead of walking into a line, you actually walk into a model of Rockefeller Center. It is a fantastic place where you can watch television shows here in the United States. The Tonight Show is a very popular show with Johnny Carson, who was back on many years back. And you can go watch a lot of the TV shows. You can play video games that are there. You can also hang out on sofas and talk to panda bears if that's your thing. And we can also charge our phones and watch entertainment, such as, in this case, barbershop quintets. And it is a really fascinating way to think about the wait experience. Now, my buddy told me that when they launched the ride, people loved it so much, or they loved the wait time so much they weren't going on the ride, which is a different problem. But the problems we ask, the questions we ask, have an impact on the solutions. So we started off with the question, how can we speed up the bags? And then we went to, how can we slow down the passengers? We then came back to, how can we reduce the wait time, to how can we improve the wait time, improve the wait experience? Now, some people say to me, Steve, I always carry on my luggage. I don't appreciate the fact that we walk further to get our bags. I just want to get off the plane and get home. So they asked me the question, how can we slow down the passengers with checked bags? How can we slow down the passengers with checked bags? So not every passenger. Well, now we can't reconfigure the whole airport. We can only reconfigure maybe the plane. So in this case, maybe if you have checked bags, you sit at the back of the plane. And so it takes you a little longer to get off the plane because you are now taking a little extra time. And so when you get to baggage claim, you're not waiting. Or another option might be, how can we distract people? How can we distract people? We might ask the question, how do we make the wait time seem shorter? Maybe we don't create a great wait time, but we distract them so it seems shorter. Think about when you get your bags and you go outside. At least here, most of the people, when they get their bags and they go outside, they order a ride share. Whether it's an Uber or a Lyft or some other ride share, they order one. And when they're doing that, what do? They are glued to their phone. They are staring at their phone. Why? Because they can see a very teeny version of a car making its way to them. But what if instead of a car, poof, it was a bag? And so you could actually see a bag moving closer to you, and it would distract you because you're watching it move. So you can see with this one simple example, we reframed it 6 different ways very, very quickly, each of them yielding a completely different result. So I love this quote that's attributed to Einstein. By the way, coming back to our early experiment where I did the colors, the numbers, the furniture, and the genius, not the colors, the colors, the furniture, and the genius. Some of you probably had Einstein sitting in a blue chair. For you, I have this picture. But I love this quote that's attributed to Einstein. He reputedly said, if I had an hour to save the world, I would spend 59 minutes defining the problem, 1 minute finding solutions. That's 59 minutes defining the problem, 1 minute finding solutions. And from my experience, most organizations, most teams, and most individuals are spending 60 minutes solving the wrong problem. So I want to talk about how can you reframe problems. It's one thing to say reframe a problem. It's another thing to do it. And the challenge that we have is we have so many assumptions based on our past experiences that they influence our ability to see better possible questions, which could lead to better solutions. So I've developed a tool that you will all get. It's very simple, but it's very powerful. And it is 25 different lenses for reframing a problem. 25 different lenses for reframing a problem. Now, the 25 lenses are broken down into 5 different categories. These 5 different categories are, as you can see here, reduce abstraction. So if we're asking a question that is big and broad, like how can I increase revenues or margins or productivity? Well, if you ask that question, you get thousands of answers. So the reduce abstraction help you break it down into something smaller. Whereas sometimes we ask questions that are too specific, sort of like the NASA example. It was a little too specific. It assumed it was a washing machine. Or even the toothpaste example, where I'm a dental expert. I'm going to have the solution. Boom. We have 5 lenses that will help you increase abstraction. We have switch elements, which is about changing the direction of things. Instead of solving for this, we solve for that. Instead of speeding up the bags, we slow down the passengers. The change perspectives is all around how do we look at the question from a different angle. And the very important zero-in lenses are the ones that help you make sure you're solving the right problem in the first place. So there are 25 lenses in total. Here's the first page of the sheet. Again, all of you will get access to this. Here's the second page of the sheet. And here's what I'm going to have you do. If you have a sheet of paper, you can write this down. This is where I want you to go. It's going to be stevenshapiro.com/SEAT, and the password is mobility. And if you go there, you will be able to download the 25 lenses. There are templates in there. There are videos. I will put all my slides from this presentation on there after this is done. So you're going to have access to all of this as soon as we're done. So if you have a sheet of paper and can write this down, great. If not, we'll make sure we get you that information so you're able to do it. No passwords or anything. Just go in and take care and download the information that you want. So I want to demonstrate how these lenses were used in the previous examples, and then we'll tackle the conversation around mobility. So let's take a look at the toothpaste example. So the toothpaste example is a great example of the analogy lens. And the analogy lens says, who else has solved a similar problem? Who else has solved a similar problem? So in this case, the problem was solved by someone outside of the toothpaste area of expertise, and it was solved by people in dental care. When we come to the NASA example, this is a great example of the substitute lens. Now, the substitute lens says, what if I changed just 1 or 2 words in the problem statement? What would it yield? Now, these could be synonyms that have the same meaning or similar meanings, or there could be different words that have different meanings. So, for example, we could ask, how can I improve revenues, which is different than how can I improve margins. And so that's a different word and it has very different implications. The next example that we saw actually used two different lenses, which is the education system example. The first lens we used was the result lens, which was asking, what does this make possible? What does an education system make possible? A child's learning. Now, once we know what the child's learning is, we then ask the leverage lens, which is what's the one factor that has the greatest impact? Okay, well, positive parental involvement. And then the baggage claim example, this is one which used a whole bunch of different lenses. I'll just highlight three of them right now. The first one that we used was the flip lens. The flip lens says, instead of solving for this, let's solve for that. Instead of focusing on speeding up bags, how do we slow down the passengers? So we change the question by changing the parameter we're actually solving for. We also used the substitute lens, which was instead of reducing the wait time, we changed the word reduce to improve. Okay, well now we're talking about an experience rather than speed. And then the last one I'll point out, which is a lens that I really like, which is the variations lens, which said instead of slowing down all passengers, how can we, instead of using a one-size-fits-all strategy, only slow down the passengers with checked bags? That now forces us to think differently. So what we're going to do right now is we are going to try to tackle the problem of mobility. And as we do this, I'm just going to point out a couple things, is that as I go through the lenses on this, I'm not looking at it from any specific angle other than the biggest, broadest picture when it comes to mobility. And there's a lot of different ways we could go with this, but also please recognize that I'm not an expert in transportation. Expertise sometimes can be the enemy of innovation. So it's an advantage for me to not be an expert, but it also means that I don't have all the context and all the data. Because here's one of the things that I want you to understand is any questions we ask need to be backed up by some form of data or analysis. So innovation and problem solving is actually a very analytical process. It's not as creative as people think. Once you know what problem to solve, then we can be creative, but we need to be solving the right problem. So we're going to try something very cool here. And I'm going to tell you, this is the first group that I've decided to try this with. It's a challenge. I decided to take it on. We are going to do 10 reframes in 10 minutes using 10 different lenses. Now, I know that that sounds like maybe a lot of conversation going on very quickly, but I think that this is going to be a lot of fun, and you'll get a chance to see how we use the lenses to do that. So for this, what I'm going to do is I'll pull up the lenses, and we will go through a few different reframes. And with that, I'm going to put up a 10-minute timer so we can get started. So first, remember, the original question was, how can we reinvent mobility in cities? So I'm going to be looking at this again from the broadest perspective. And the first lens that I'm going to use is the lens that we also used for the education system example, and that is the result lens. The result lens says, what is the point of this? So in the case of the education system, the result of an education system was a child's learning. Well, I would argue that mobility is a means to an end. People want to get somewhere. So maybe the reframe for this would be, how can we enable easy access to local products, services, and people? So basically, it's about access. It's about getting what they want, and maybe not so much about the means of getting what they want. So that's the result lens in action. Now, if we use that as the starting point, then we might start thinking about the leverage lens, which is also the lens that we used for the education system. Again, positive parental involvement was the leverage point for a child's learning. Well, in this case, what is the leverage point when it comes to mobility? And my hypothesis might be, and again, there's two ways to look at leverage. One is what's going to give us the greatest value, but we could also look at it from what's the greatest roadblock? What's the greatest barrier? And if I look at it through the lens of what's the greatest barrier, my argument might be, without having data, is that it could be traffic and it could be parking. I know when I'm in cities and I'm trying to get around, those are the two things that I struggle with the most. So if we change the question from mobility to how can we reduce traffic or how can we increase parking, that gives us potentially a more focused way of looking at the problem. Let's take those two reframes, traffic and parking, and let's put those through a couple of different lenses. So in this case, I'd like to go through the resequence lens. The resequence lens is a super powerful lens, and this resequence lens is all around timing. So it could be about predicting, postponing, or parallelism, but it could also be just about changing the timing that things happen. So my guess is that in most cities, traffic isn't a 24/7 type of situation. It doesn't happen all day, 7 days a week, but it happens in peaks and valleys. And so if you use the resequence lens, maybe the question would be is, how can we shift the timing of travel in order to smooth traffic? Now we're looking at a different perspective on this. We're looking at the timing of keeping the same volume, but moving those peaks and valleys into different places. Or if we go to the parking example, we might want to use the flip lens. And the flip lens is all about how can we create more parking spaces or more space, but just like the baggage claim, instead of speeding up the bags, we slow down the passengers. Maybe here, instead of increasing the amount of parking capacity in terms of actual size, which may not be changeable, maybe we reduce the size of the cars. And I know that SEAT's working on these types of things with smaller cars that can go into smaller spaces. So this is great, but it gets you thinking is, what if we had a car, you could fit 2 cars into the space of 1, we've doubled the parking. Excellent. So that's another lens that we can use. A lens that I also really like, and I think it might be appropriate here, is the access lens. And the access lens is saying, how do we move away from this belief that people need to own an asset? Whether it's when we're doing business and we have our data in the cloud, we don't own the data servers. We are basically renting, we're subscribing to a cloud service. So the same might be true here is, how can I rent or subscribe to transportation? And this gets me thinking about like timeshares. Timeshares have a model where you pay some money up front and you get to stay in there for a certain number of days. And that could be an interesting model as you create sort of a timeshare for cars where everybody gets to have 5 hours a week and it costs you 1 flat fee and you get to drive wherever you want to drive for those 5 hours. Everything's included as part of your subscription. Need more time? No problem. So it's, again, a different way of looking at the problem. We're now taking it from an ownership perspective and moving it into an access perspective, which then might lead us to, and I'm going to clean these up because we got a lot of circles here, is the reassign lens. And the reassign lens is the who question. So who are we going to focus on? And so in some cases, what we want to do is focus on who owns the asset, who owns the car, who owns the transportation. And it might even be as simple as, who could SEAT or someone else partner with to create a subscription timeshare to cars that would now be available to people, that gives them access when they need it, only when they need it, and they have partial ownership, essentially, into a car. So it changes the model, it changes the dynamics significantly, because we're now looking at a completely different set of dimensions. And in this case, it's the who dimension. We did talk about the substitute lens a fair amount. There are some words that I've used sort of interchangeably, like cars and mobility and transportation and vehicles. But these are not all synonymous. Like, cars are a form of transportation, but not all transportation are cars. And vehicles, not all vehicles are cars necessarily. And transportation is something completely different potentially. And when I look at this, it's interesting because then I start thinking about, well, how do I transport people? Well, I'm again, here in Orlando, Florida. If you go to Disney World, one of the things that they have are people movers. So what if we created, this is going to sound crazy, so please bear with me. I'm only throwing out some wild things to get people thinking, but what if instead of having a vehicle that actually moved, the sidewalks moved? And there was ability to just move people around cities that way. We would increase mobility without actually having to add anything to the traffic. So it's, again, not saying these are good questions, but they're different questions that get you thinking in different ways. One of the lenses that's not on the 25 here, but it's one that I really like, is the relocate lens. And that's the where. This is also related to, in this case, the reassign lens. And Phillipe talked about this before, and I love this one as a potential example, which is we talk about mobility assuming that it has to be the individual who is going to the service provider, whether it's a restaurant or a hairdresser or a gym. but maybe that service can come to them. Now we do that for food delivery, but what about other things? In Long Island, New York, here in the United States, there is a mobile gym. There's a guy who has a van that has in it working equipment for being able to work out, and he drives that gym to someone's house. It's sanitized before anybody goes in there, and they're able to work out in their driveway, basically. So that brings the service to the individual. So the question might be, how do we increase business mobility rather than individual mobility? A different question. Another lens would be the bad idea. We're on number 9 right now. And the bad idea lens, unfortunately, is the current situation lens. Had we done this a year ago, we probably have a very different conversation about it. But the bad idea lens says, what's the stupidest idea? What's the worst idea? What's the worst case scenario? And in this case, maybe it's no mobility. So we're not able to actually get around, and maybe because traffic is less, people are actually more mobile, but there's nowhere to go. So maybe we need to change the word a little bit here. And the worst case scenario is no one can be physically mobile, but maybe they can be digitally mobile. So it gets us thinking about, how do we create experiences that can be brought to the individual digitally rather than physically? There are some hotel chains that have created videos and other things to bring to their best guests so that they can have the experience of sitting on a beach in Hawaii while they're at their home. We can get creative with this, but maybe eliminating mobility will open up some new opportunities. And the last one that I will talk about goes back to the first page here, which was the analogy lens, which is where we started with a toothpaste. And for this, I'm going to give you an example from an analogy, which is the important point about it, the analogy lens. And this is from the bicycle industry. I did an event for the bicycle industry, and they wanted to get people to to wear helmets to improve safety. And they wanted to regulate and make helmets mandatory. Well, I found this article that I thought was fascinating. This was in the Wall Street Journal that said that bike helmets can actually do more harm than good. This seems counterintuitive, but what was happening? People, when they had to wear helmets, felt nervous, and therefore they weren't riding. So there weren't a lot of bicycles on the road, which meant that the cars owned the road. But this is a picture from Copenhagen. Now, one of the things you're gonna notice here is there's lots of cars. The other thing you're gonna notice is no one's wearing a helmet. The bicycles own the road, not the cars. There's safety in numbers when it comes to this. And so by shifting your perspective a little bit, by looking at maybe there's something we can do here to increase mobility by creating lanes for scooters and things of that nature, now we get a completely different answer. And with that, our 10 minutes is up. And I would love to now move to Q&A, where we can talk about anything that you would like to talk about. So Phillipe.
Well, Stephen. Thank you, Stephen, for your great presentation and for the last challenge. You reframed the problem, not how to challenge, but how to very quickly challenge and reframe a challenge, no? Which is, I will try tomorrow. I'm reframing every day, but I never try to do that so fast. So I think we all have a good challenge. It was a good example. So let's start with the Q&A. I don't see anything now with the lights, but I will try to move to see if there are some questions from the people here. One question? Here, yeah.
Just one question. How do we reframe the reframe? Do you know what I mean? I mean.
So how do we reframe the reframe?
Yes. I mean, how will be the next evolution of your framework, right? So basically now you work with lenses, but what's next? If you don't mind to share it with us, okay? Thank you.
Sure. So there's a couple of different things, and if I'm understanding the question correctly. So one thing I will say, I'm just going to get rid of the things over my shoulder so that you can just see my face. You don't need to see the questions there. One of the things that I will say is that the reason why I use these lenses is because one of the purposes of the lenses is to challenge assumptions, to surface assumptions. And so we could actually do a reframe by focusing just on what assumptions am I making about the problem. So if I'm redesigning a car, for example, I probably assume that the car has 4 wheels. I probably assume that it has a steering wheel. I probably assume that it has windshield wipers. So I make all these assumptions. But maybe that's going to prevent us from coming up with some new solutions. So if you figure out what your assumptions are, it allows you to then say, what if my assumption's wrong? What if instead of 4 wheels, we had 3 wheels? What if instead of a steering wheel, autonomous vehicles will help us achieve that goal eventually? Windshield wipers, maybe this is just a completely different way to remove the water from a windscreen. So assumptions are one place to start. And then the other thing that we're just working on, and if anybody's interested in this, I'm happy to share it with a limited number of people right now, is we're developing some tools that actually have some intelligence in them that help you actually do the reframe. So if you're familiar with chatbots where you can type in a question and it will give you an answer, we're developing those right now to actually help you reframe your reframe. Because the problem sometimes is knowing which lens to use. After you do it for a while, you get better at it, but you need something to help you expedite that whole process. So if anybody's interested, write me and I can certainly show you those tools and let you give them a try. I hope that answers your question. I'm not sure. I mean, there's obviously a lot of artificial intelligence and machine learning and things of that nature, which are improving problem solving, but that's certainly the next thing.
Thank you. Fran?
Hi, Stephen, thank you and congratulations for your presentation. You're full of energy. If it's so obvious that if we are in front of a problem, we have to think differently to get different solutions. If it's so obvious, what makes humans so reluctant to accept the truth that we have to reframe and rethink and see the reality from different perspectives?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and it comes back in some respects to something I talked about earlier, which is we're wired for survival, not innovation. So there's so many interesting studies that have been done to show that even when we say, there's one fascinating study, I won't get into all the details of it, but there's one fascinating study that was done by Cornell University, which is my alma mater. And what they did was they looked at what executives said they wanted. Then they asked them a very simple question: do you like change, innovation, and creativity? And pretty much every single executive said, yes, we want it, we need it, we have to have it. Yet, when they tested these individuals using a specific test called the implicit association test, which helps people understand their unconscious biases, that is, what do they truly believe? What they found was that the words creativity, innovation, and change were most highly correlated with the words agony, pain, and vomit. And basically what that means is at a deep psychological level, we don't want change because it is considered to be risky. And so what ends up happening is we very quickly formulate the question, we very quickly formulate the solution, and then we very quickly take action. Now, if you go back to the days where we were being eaten by saber-toothed cats, for example, if you saw a big cat with fangs and it was furry and it was growling at you, you wouldn't sit there and analyze it and say, is this something I should be scared of? No, you would get the heck out of there. You would run as fast as you could. That works from a survival perspective, and that's what we're doing in many respects. The problem is now we make decisions so quickly at a subconscious level, and we're running quickly, quite often in the wrong direction. So by taking a little extra time to just, as you said, make sure we're asking the right question, the real problem, and recognize that that time will actually help us survive, help us stay relevant, that's the key, but it's not a natural instinct for human beings.
More questions? I see one here and one there. Where's the mic? There also, yeah.
Hello. Thanks a lot for your presentation, and thanks for the exercise. I think it was very brilliant to see how many times you can reframe one topic. Then, if we think about real life in a company, how we can reframe in so many ways, and you proved it. How can we know where to stop at some point? Where to know, this reframe we can work on, because then it's it opens tons of possibilities, and then we might get lost. So I'm sure it goes with design thinking, but it's just if you have any tips around it.
Yes, absolutely. So that is a great point. I mean, you don't want to, and that's the reason why also I did it in 10 minutes. So a lot of people, when they hear this, they think, okay, well, this is going to be a very long process. And it doesn't have to be, and it shouldn't be. If you start spending too much time on the reframing, then you're definitely going down the wrong path. And that's why I have more than 25 lenses, but I only put 25 in the book and 25 that people get, because any more than that is unmanageable for most people. So here's the thing that you're going to find. When we ask questions, there's two ways we tend to ask questions. One way is very big, and if we were to look for solutions, we'll get thousands of solutions. How can I improve the business? How can I improve productivity? How can I increase revenues? If you ask that question for your organization, department, you'll probably get thousands of ideas. So you know right there that's too big and we need to reduce the abstraction. In some cases, though, we ask them and they're too specific, and it's like we get stuck. And that might mean they're too specific. And so I would say if you spend, I mean, we typically only have people spend about 30 minutes on the reframing process and then take a pause and go through and look at the questions and see which ones feel like they're going to generate not 1,000 ideas, but rather a few valuable solutions. One of the things you'll find is as you do this and you get better at it, it becomes very natural. Typically when I do this with a client, we will do a 1-hour call where they take a problem. By the end of the 1 hour, we've identified the lens and the problem reframe that is going to create the greatest value for them. So it's not a long process, and it shouldn't be a long process. It's just something, it's like going to the gym. It's a muscle. You have to practice it. And once you get good at practicing it, I promise you it'll get natural. Here's something which I would encourage you to do with your team. 25 lenses, 5 days a week. That means that for the course of 5 weeks, if you take a problem that your organization is trying to solve, and you have everybody on your team take a different lens every day for 25 days, and only spend 5 to 10 minutes at most, working on that lens, after the end of the 5 weeks, you are going to have an incredible collection of reframes of which it'll be obvious which ones are going to give you the greatest results. That is my recommendation to you to work with your team.
Thank you. We have 2 more questions. One here.
Yeah. Good afternoon, Mr. Shapiro. Delightful presentation and very engaging. I had the query that as a psychologist, I know that like when we engage with people, the problem solving that you've talked about, we determine it as insight. And in psychology, we understand that, yes, of course, individuals are perfectly capable of developing insight, and as you put it in the key frame of different lenses. But do you also think that perhaps the same results can be achieved by collective work, as per the phrase, 2 heads are better than one? The more heads, the more angles you may be able to achieve when facing a problem.
Absolutely. So we found going through these exercises that 4 to 5 people is the right amount for the reframing process, and there is a process we use for that. But let me build on what you just said, because there is in the world of innovation, I've been actively involved with this for 15 years now, is something called crowdsourcing. And all crowdsourcing is a fancy word that means we're going to ask a lot of people for their opinions, suggestions, and ideas. And so some of the solutions that I gave you before were actually solved by crowd. So the education system example, when the question was asked, how can we get positive parental involvement, crowdsourcing was used. The reason why the solution was found in Bogota, Colombia is because we asked people who has a solution to this specific problem. So crowdsourcing is brilliant for finding solutions, but also having enough data points on the reframing is important. And we could talk a lot about what types of people do you want to have on the reframing process. I've found that you want people with different experiences and backgrounds, and also people with different personalities. So I have a tool that I use which helps people understand when it comes to innovation, are you good at the data side? Are you good at the ideation side? Are you good at the implementation side? Or are you good at the connection and people side of things? And if you have those 4 types of people working on a problem, both on the reframing and on the solving, you will always find better perspectives, because now you have people thinking about not just the solution itself, but the implementability of the solution. And the earlier you get that in the process, the better it is. So absolutely.
Yes, we have one more question here.
Yeah, my question was on how do you stick to the brief that is already covered over there. So I'm going to make another one. Can you talk a little bit about the value realization of the innovation process, in the sense that when you get the brief, you work on the process, you get the solution? How do you make sure that you add value to the companies or whoever is making the briefing to you? Thank you.
Yes, so the question's on value and value realization. And the key with all of this is to make sure that you have measures up front. And there's a series of measures that I'm always looking at. And they tend to be a little different than what a lot of other people are looking at, because I'm looking at, because I do a lot with crowds, there's something that I use which is really about, like when we do a lot of innovation, we ask people for their ideas, their opinions, suggestions. And when we do that, we get a lot of data, a lot of ideas, thousands of ideas. What I prefer to do is, instead of asking people for their ideas, I want people to be able to solve a well-framed problem. And then we invite a lot of people to do that. And so when we use that challenge statement, the problem statement, as the way of engaging people, now we can actually measure things. We can measure how many solutions were there. If we have 1,000 solutions, we did a poor job of reframing, because it should not provide that many solutions with a good reframe. How many of them were actually deemed as valuable? So I'm looking at sort of the signal to noise ratio. How much work are we doing for the amount of value we're getting? And then there's obviously on the back end, implementation. How many of those solutions get implemented in the value they create? But we should, and here's what I love about focusing on the challenge rather than the idea, is we can evaluate solutions for challenges, problem statements. We can evaluate the value of a solution on its own merit. We can create evaluation criteria for every problem we're trying to solve, and we should have a sense of how much value it's going to create. When we ask people for their ideas, we get lots of ideas of which some of them are going to have no value, low value, irrelevant value, negative value in some cases. So when you focus on the challenge as the driver of everything that you do, and you engage your entire organization around solving well-framed challenges, now the value realization can be measured every step of the process, and we can predict it early in the process. And I'll close with one last thing here, and then I'll get to one closing story, is that our goal here with all of this is not to fail. And I know in innovation, a lot of people are saying, we need to fail. If we're not breaking eggs, we're not innovating. And I would argue that that's the wrong mindset. What we want is to turn people into master experimenters. And if we can get people to develop a hypothesis and test that hypothesis in the least expensive, least risky way, then we can create a series of scalable experiments, which over time we will get more data. And one of the biggest challenges we face, and I'll just sort of close with this thought, is the biggest challenge we face with innovation and value realization and failure is that it's called confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is basically the brain's way of filtering out anything that's inconsistent with something we don't believe. So if you have an idea and you think it's a great idea and you start testing your idea, even if you get data that tells you it's a bad idea, it's a bad solution, your brain's going to either ignore it or it's going to justify it. And then you'll continue to do it. So we need to put things in place to make sure that we prevent that confirmation bias. And again, it's a longer topic, but I think it's really, really important to make sure we know the value up front, the process up front, and then we can actually determine whether or not we're producing the results we wanted to produce.
Stephen, maybe
So
sorry, you're not finished.
Yeah, please.
No, I wanted to ask a last question, and it's a question I see that they have in many companies. You know that many companies now are using innovation methodologies like design thinking, design sprint, whatever. And from my opinion, and also what I see in the companies, most of these tools are missing this first part. They are going deeper in the same vision of the problem. And why do you think they are not developing the reframe? Because these are professionals in innovation and they miss this first part.
It's an interesting observation, and I do think that there is a design thinking concept that was fall in love with the problem, not the solution. And so good design thinking should follow this type of methodology, and it should be based on a couple of the lenses that I have in the zero-in area, which is all around the real problem, the real business, observation and insights. Those are going to be key lenses for making sure we're zeroing in on the right problem. But I think what happens is I think a lot of people, I hate to say this, but in some cases it's just egos. We think as leaders, we're supposed to have the answers. The problem is having all the answers is not the answer. The best leaders are the ones who are able to ask questions that get others in the organization to ask questions. And to me, that's just a really powerful way to view all of this. But I think a lot of people, it's just like, hey, I know the answer, I'm just gonna go with it. I think that's why even if it's in the methodology, they ignore that step because they don't believe it's important enough.
Okay, thank you. I think you have a story to tell us now.
I do have one last story, which I'd like to just share because I think it pulls all this together. And it is from, let's see, we'll put it here. All right, so this is a story from when I lived in England. I lived in England for 5 years. For 3 of those years, I worked for Formula One race car team. And being an American, I have to admit at the time, this was going back to 1999 when I moved to London. I have to admit, I didn't know a lot about Formula One. I knew about race cars, but I didn't know Formula One. And I would go to the races and I would go to, watch them do it. And it's amazing. I mean, it's an amazing sport. And a lot of people don't realize just how talented the drivers are and the engineering that goes into the cars. But the thing that always amazed me the most were the pit crews. I love watching the pit crews. To me, the pit crews are so fascinating. So here's a video of a pit crew. You can watch this, don't blink. I think you'll find it interesting. So here it is, the car comes in, the car stops, boom, it's up, the tires are off, the tires are on, and the car is gone in 1.92 seconds. So I think that's pretty amazing. And I watch these and I'm like, wow, that's absolutely incredible. Like, how do they do that? And I remember asking one of the people on the team, and he told me a story, and he said, the way they get the teams to go fast is the way you would expect them to. They tell them to go fast, and they time them, and they do it over and over and over, and they go faster and faster and faster. And there's a point that no matter what they do, no matter how hard they try, they can't go 1/1000th of a second faster. That's their best possible time. And then they tried a number of different techniques to see if they could get them to go faster, offering them more money and a number of other different motivations that you might think about. But then they tried something interesting. And the story that was told to me is they were told, the pit crew was told that they are to go fast, but they aren't to worry about the speed because they're going to be evaluated not on their speed, but rather on their style, on their movement. So as they're changing the tires, they're to think smooth. When I worked with a team, they would fuel the car, think smooth. As you're working the jacks, think smooth. And they would, of course, time them. And what they found was that when they weren't trying to go fast, but were focused on their movements, they went 0.2 to 0.3 of a second faster than their best previous time. And this is fascinating if you think about it, because then they asked the pit crew members, do you think you were going faster or slower? And they were told, we thought we were going slower. And I call this the performance paradox. And the performance paradox is one of the lenses. It is lens number 18. And basically the performance paradox says that sometimes the more you focus on a goal, the less likely you are to achieve that goal. If you're trying to go fast, sometimes the key is to not focus on speed, but focus on style. When it comes to sales, we've done studies. Sometimes the best salespeople aren't the people who are focused on how much they sell, but how well they serve. There are so many different examples of the performance paradox in action. And I use this to close because I think there's a corollary to the performance paradox, which is the solution paradox. And the solution paradox says, sometimes the more you try to focus on solutions, the less likely you are to find a solution. Sometimes the key is to step back and make sure we're asking better questions. Because changing the question, even just one word in the question, can have a huge impact on the range of solutions that we develop. So we are in challenging times. I know that these are not ideal conditions for us, but I believe that when we look back on these days, these months, and however long this is, we're going to feel as though this has been a time of greater innovation than ever in history. But we need more problem solvers, better problem reframers. And that's why I'm so thrilled and honored to be with you here tonight, to be able to share this, because we need you, your talent, your organizations to drive this type of thinking to make the biggest impact we can, because that's what's going to get us out of our current situation and onto the next and better reality. Thank you so much and have a great evening.
Thanks, Stephen, for this exciting presentation. Thanks a lot. Una última palabra de logística antes de acabar. No salgáis ahora. El proceso de momento es quedarnos sentados y nos harán salir uno por uno. Veo la persona que nos ayudará con la luz por ahí. Y muchas gracias a todos por haber venido hoy. Espero que habéis aprovechado. Habéis visto la dirección del sitio que Steven va a abrir para poder tener todos los materiales. Yo he visto los vídeos, veréis que son muy didácticos, están muy bien, muy bien, muy bien. Y después la grabación de la presentación de hoy se colgará también y os daremos las informaciones necesarias para poder llegar. Muchas gracias. Adiós.
Thank you.